Hey there, everyone. Welcome to our first session of Thirsty Sword Lesbians by April Kit Walsh. As part of the Gauntlet Reading Club, we'll be using Hannah Templar's CosmoKnights to inspire the fiction. But of course, as we said before, we're using it to kind of as a jumping off point rather than as a kind of descriptive like text that we're going to say, no, this didn't happen in the book. This game is hosted through the Gauntlet. The Gauntlet, for folks who don't know, is an online game community mostly focused on role-playing games of the indie and OSR variety. Besides publishing a zine called The Codex, it also puts out several podcasts about role-playing games. And of course, it organizes a gaming calendar, which this and many other games are organized through every month. The calendar is open to non-members, so feel free to jump on over there or through the link below if you are interested in playing with any of the folks here tonight or any of the other people on the Gauntlet. And I think that jumps us into things here, but I want to do a quick go-round of us all. I know most of us know each other, but just for anyone who might be watching, I am Stephen, he, him. I've been here on the Gauntlet for about 2 years now, and I'm organizing and running for this event. If we could go, I guess, around clockwise around StreamYard to you, Puckett.
Sorry about that. Couldn't find the mute button for a second. Hi there, I am Puckett. I use he, him pronouns. I have been on the Gauntlet for a while, and I'm really, really excited about this game. I read CosmoKnights some time ago online. I'm stoked that it's got a print run coming or out. I didn't know there was a second book, so I'm excited about that. I know what I'm doing for the remainder of the day. So I am really, really happy to be here.
Cool. And continuing on to Lyra.
I'm Lyra. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, and yeah, I'm really stoked for this too. I kind of had CosmoKnights on my kind of to-read list for a while, but hadn't got around to it, and then kind of reading it for kind of for the book club session was yeah, this is so good. So looking forward to it, and yeah, really stoked for it.
Cool.
Yeah, and hi, I'm David. I use he, him pronouns. I was introduced to CosmoKnights by sort of this, in preparation for this game. But yeah, again, just chiming with everyone else, it's a really great comic series. I like it a lot. I'm also a fan of Thirsty Sword Lesbians. I have run it before. This is the first time I'll be playing it, though, the first time I'll be playing it outside of a one shot. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, and how we can kind of build our world, as it were.
Yeah, and before we get too far into things, I want to give an overview of the safety tools we'll be using. Of course, most of the folks here are very familiar with them. These are common on the Gauntlet, but it's always good to go over for any time we bring a group together and for anyone who might be watching. So first off, this game follows the Gauntlet's open door policy. I think that's the first. It's not listed as an official safety tool, but it's useful to remember that real life comes first. And often you might be pulled away from the game for any number of reasons, either because someone needs you in the real world, or because something's happening in the game that is depleting your energy, or just too uncomfortable to stick around for. If you ever need to step away, it's helpful to me to know what, in terms of framing scenes, when you might be back. But if that's not possible, don't feel the need to message me. Just feel free to step away for however long you need, or even for the entire rest of the session. Besides that, we'll also be making use of the safety tool script change. Script change is kind of using the language of VHS tapes or recording, we might say, for to kind of give us a set of language to discuss scenes with. We have pause, which is where we take a moment to stop and just basically do a check-in. Sometimes you might do it because I'm actually not comfortable with what's happening and I wanted to take a moment to say, to express that. It might be just that I have just done something as my character and I don't actually know if it's okay or not. So I want to take a moment to check in with everyone else that they're feeling good. Pause is a useful way of doing a quick stop and checking in with everyone about their feelings on what's just happened. Fast forward is a way of kind of, maybe we have stumbled onto something we find uncomfortable. Maybe we have gotten out into the doldrums of a scene and are getting caught up in little details. Calling for a fast forward is a way of saying, you know what, let's maybe not get into detail here and kind of move on to another scene. Like, let's work out what happened here and then move on, rather than getting into detail about everything that's happening. There's also rewind, which is effectively a way of retconning something. Maybe you realize a session or a scene later, but something that happened earlier is something you're uncomfortable with, or you have a much better idea for what happened there. Rewind is a way of going back and sort of re-editing what happened there, to make either, as I said, either to make you more comfortable with the fiction, or to work in an idea that that like we all think, oh yeah, that should have happened there. And finally, there is the step by step, or slow. I forget the last one now. But it's basically a way of, it's something we don't rely upon as often, because usually frame by frame, Puckett is, thank you, Puckett. It's something that we usually don't often use because there's usually not much need to with the other safety tools. But usually the main use of it is, as Puckett has said in games he runs, when we come into a scene where the content is making us uncomfortable, but we still feel that there is a specific need to have it, to play it out. Frame by frame is basically us saying, we're going to turn the safety tools to max here. We're going to regularly stop and check in with folks and make certain that everyone is okay. Like I said, it's something we probably won't do. We'll probably resort to using other safety tools before we use frame by frame. But it's good to know that it's there. We'll also be using the X card. The X card is basically, if something happens in the fiction that you are uncomfortable with, that you don't want in the fiction, either make a sign of an X with your hands, type it into the private chat, or just unmute and say X card. We will probably ask what it is you're X carding, but there's no need to justify it. If like there's also, if you need to call on the X card and you're like, well, it happened, last session already, and it's happening again, so I don't want to call the X card. There's no pressure. You can call the X card still and say, well, I was okay with it last session because I thought it was going to be a one-off thing, but I actually don't want to see this going forward. There's no need to sort of be like, to set a precedent with X cards. So if, yeah. And finally, we're going to be using lines and veils. Lines and veils is a tool where we sort of create a document before play and kind of edit it as we continue playing the game, of things that we are comfortable having in the fiction, but don't want to get into detail about, which are veils. things that we just don't want in the fiction at all, that we are just keeping out of the fiction, which are lines, and things that we are comfortable having in the fiction, but we just want to remind everyone to do check-ins about that whenever they come up. So like a common line for most games I'm in are sexual assault and violence, as well as torture. Common veils are a common veil is sexual content, which is usually when it happens, we'll say, okay, the two are probably getting up to stuff now, but we're going to fade to black on the details there. So if folks could take a look over at our safety and roller tab and give a quick look over to what we have right now, add in anything that you want, and then type OK when everything is where you are happy with it. Have lines on animal abuse, harm to children, sexual assault, violence or coercion, harm to animals, homophobia, torture by PCs, pandemics, racism/speciesism, cannibalism, graphic descriptions of intentionally inflicted head trauma, and transphobia. We have veils on suicide, eye injuries, graphic gore, sexual content, and torture by NPCs. And then we have an ask first on bullying, which thank you for that. It's something I always like to ask first on, but I had forgotten to put that in. We also, I see folks have already filled it out, but we also just do a romance options. This is just a check-in with folks of make certain that we are not making each other uncomfortable by even though this is a game that presumes a certain amount of romantic tension, this is a game that can just as easily, I think, be played with characters just having crushes and like intense friendships with folks. So it's useful to know to kind of check in with people that they are comfortable with having romance, and whether it is with PCs and NPCs. Folks here have already filled it out, and everybody seems mostly okay with stuff. Did anyone, I want to check in with you, David, did you have any questions about any of the lines or veils we've established before we move on to other things?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Cool. Well, that takes us to, I think, the end of mostly going over the safety tools. And remember, it's important always to remember here that even if you don't have the right, if you don't remember the right term or you don't know what to invoke, it's always fair to just say, to just interrupt and say, I'm uncomfortable here, or I have a problem here. There's no need to remember the specific safety tool you're calling upon if you need something in the immediate immediately. These are things for us. These are things to help us give it language, not a kind of prescriptive of what you need to be doing to be heard in the group. But yeah. So now that we've gotten through safety tools, the game of Thirsty Sword Lesbians, to kind of set us up here on what the sort of cats of the game is that we'll be getting into it a bit of the background relationships. But Thirsty Sword Lesbians, I think, unlike a few other Apocalypse World games that assume a more tense or combative stance between player characters, Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a game where characters are all more or less members of the same community and have and are specifically allies and friends of each other, and probably also crushes and lovers and all those other things as well. But this is not as much a game about like, say, in the vein of Apocalypse World or Monster Hearts, where a lot of the presumption is that there is going to be a lot of player character versus player character conflict, direct conflict. There will probably be disagreements and rivalries and conflict among the player characters, but ultimately you are all assumed more or less to be fighting against the toxic powers. And so I wanted to throw out to folks, if maybe we want to go counterclockwise, starting with David, of the playbooks out there, what were ones that particularly were of interest to you, David?
Broadly speaking, a lot of them. I think it would be fair to say. I think there's some cool ones out there. I've been flicking through some of the new ones, which I must admit I hadn't seen previously, which look quite cool. I thought the Bloody sounds like it could be quite an interesting one for this particular setting, with the kind of focus on. With the comics that focus on like these jewels as a sort of centerpiece, that seems like it could be quite an interesting one.
And this is actually something. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Also, the other one that I thought was quite an. I'm not sure if I'm sold on the playbook itself, but I quite like the look of again, just with how the world. Or the galaxy or whatever you want to call it is. I thought that the Hollow Goddess sounds quite interesting as well. Just in the context of that, but no, I hadn't really made any like particular thoughts on which one I would like to play. Just those two kind of the ones I hadn't seen before leapt out as me as being quite interesting in the context of this particular setting.
Yeah, and we should remind ourselves here that this was something we had brought into discussion last time, is that while the game of Thirsty Sword Lesbians is called Thirsty Sword Lesbians, as we were discussing last time, the game is also in some sense about really being thirsty sword queers more broadly. That there is a lot of kind of using she her pronouns throughout the book, but there's also space within here to be a thirsty sword gay or a thirsty sword non-binary, and really maybe even to have something other than a sword, like I think a few of them have things like a pen as their sword. But yeah. Coming around to Lyra, what were some playbooks that stood out to you?
The first one that stood out to me is the Nature Witch. I don't know how easily. I think that would need some adaptation to work in the kind of world of the fiction.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go on.
I was thinking that we could just change out plants with little robot friends. Plants and animals with little, like you just have friends with little robots that like and can talk with them like they were people.
Yeah, so that stuck out at me. Basically because I think that's quite a lot of who I am in real life, and
it's the Gauntlet. It's who the majority of Gauntlet players are in real life. Let's be fair.
Yes. And the Spooky Witch also stuck out at me, and from the new playbooks, actually also the Hollow Goddess kind of jumped out at me again because of the kind of kind of mesh with the setting, and also it's got a bit of kind of like Promethean the Created sort of vibe to it, and that's a game I've always wanted to play without actually playing a that's a setting I've always wanted to play without actually playing the system.
Oh, cool. And finally, Puckett, what were some of the playbooks you were looking at?
I've been looking at half a dozen or so. I mean, the strange thing is every single one of the playbooks David mentioned was also a playbook I was looking at. But, you know, seriously, I'm looking at half a dozen or so. So, I mean, I didn't realize there were now this many playbooks in Thirsty Sword Lesbians. It's been a minute since I looked at it, obviously. But I don't think I had, I mean, Lyra, you were talking about the witches, I know I wasn't looking at any of those. I was looking at like the Investigator and Beast and the Legion and Infamous. So, just pick whatever. I'm good. I'll figure something out.
Yeah, I'm thinking with what you said, Stephen, with the kind of replacing plants with kind of little robots, or maybe kind of like pseudo AIs in general, kind of like the things that run ships or run doors or run kind of like the lobby of a hotel, kind of like treating them as people and being able to interact with them as people when wider society might not necessarily kind of treat them that way. I kind of really like that idea. So like, if people are cool with that,
I just realized this is episode 4 Luke Skywalker we're talking about, really.
I'm thinking it sounds like I've forgotten the name of it. The sequel
Girl
to
Genius.
No, it's a Becky Chambers book. The sequel to a long way to a small angry planet.
Yeah, A Close and Common Orbit.
Yes, that's it. That's kind of like the Hollow Goddess as well, kind of fits in with that one. But anyway, stop me going on about Becky Chambers.
Yeah, I'm also obviously always tempted by the sun hand, just because any playbook themed around baking is always going to be appealing, and it's like a reference to a really, really random anime that I watched many years ago. So it's I'm not quite sure how it fits in with big robot fights, but yeah.
I mean, I dare say you need to kind of like eat a lot to keep your strength up after big robot fights.
But yeah, so Lyra doesn't appear, but there is a lot of it doesn't appear that either of the other players, well, besides Hollow Goddess, that they are looking at many of your playbooks. It seemed that David was not strongly pointed at Hollow Goddess, but
yeah, I'm thinking actually. Again, I'm also tempted by Troubadour just because I always love a bad. But I think I'm probably going to go with the bloody, if that works with everyone.
Cool. Yeah, the bloody is definitely interesting.
I've made my mind up on Nature Witch, so
cool.
I'm going to keep it called Nature Witch because, like, I think their view would be that the technology is just as much part of nature as anything. So I'm going to keep the name.
Cool.
So that means I have to choose from, what is it now, 11 playbooks?
Do you need a D11 to roll?
Let's see what. Actually, there's 19 playbooks. So, wow. On the other hand, that was actually a really good suggestion, Lyra.
Just roll for it.
That is a 7. So, David, you said you're going for the bloody, correct? And that puts me on the Hollow Goddess.
I want to go into now of doing a quick round of introductions of our characters, and going through kind of a few things, so that we have a little bit of a baseline to jump off from when we are starting to build out relationships in the world a little bit. So let's follow the character keeper here, starting with Trace Soto, or Wolf.
Yeah, sure thing. So, Trace Soto uses he and pronouns. He is a knight, and goes by the sort of the ring name of Wolf. A veteran of the jousts, I think. Probably, at least, for a given definition of it, is probably kind of, I'm guessing, maybe in his like late 20s, early 30s, but has been on the scene for and not died for quite some time. Is a obviously is a knight for hire, and I think is probably somewhat jaded with the whole scene, but it pays the bills. I think his armor suit is kind of gunmetal grey, with a sort of stylized sort of wolf head helmet, and he wields a very, very large sword, like a proper sort of the sort of length of the body of the suit.
Cool. And I had wanted to ask, because the bloody, their thing is that they have things called victories and scars, and you start the game with one victory and scarred already answered each. And I was curious if you had any thoughts there, David. And then +1 of your choice.
Yep, sure thing. I think I think I'm going to go, because it seems like the most, given the nature of this, it seems the most likely one that would make sense. People would already know it. Is that one of my past achievements has become the stuff of legends. What is the legend, and how far is it from the truth? I think that the wolf's legend is that he won his his debut joust, and faced off against the kind of current reigning champion, and fought him single-handed. It's like obviously elements of that archery. He obviously did win that very first joust that he was in, but it was largely due to the fact that he was kind of an underdog in the match, and managed to sort of evade the focus of most of the other opponents, and sort of cleared up at the end, as it were. Yeah,
and so that does kind of raise the question for me: is how did the wolf start in jousting? Did he come from an already existing military career, or was he somehow connected to the aristocracy, or did he find his way into that job in some other way?
I think that's a good question. I think maybe I think he was in a military on one of the worlds, but yeah, I think. Tried to kind of get out of it and ended up not exactly by chance, but I think the becoming a knight was never sort of his number one plan, as it were. But yeah, he sort of fell into it, I think.
Cool. And what about your scar?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that you can't save everyone. Name someone you lost and who they were to you. I think that one of the. So actually, yeah, no, I think we'll revise it to before. I think that maybe Trace was actually a member of a noble family, but not a kind of not royalty or a particularly favoured child in his own right. But and I think that there was one of the princesses that he was aiming to win the hand of was an old friend of his, and he intended to actually kind of win her hand, possibly even for himself, more so to avoid who she would end up with. But I think in the end, someone else won the match, and she ended up married to someone she was not a fan of.
Cool. And there's technically one more, but I can give you some time to look over those, and also to not put the spotlight onto you for so long inventing all this stuff. But yeah, continuing on to 5014 or Sola. Could you introduce yourself?
I am 5014, pronounced Sola. My pronouns are they or it, or anything really. I'm not entirely sure what I am, but I am. I gained sentience during a joust when the knight whose armor I was the onboard combat AI for was attacked with an electrified spear. It shorted out systems, and the resulting glitches and errors effectively gave birth to me. And the knight, Katina, was rendered unconscious as part of this. But by updating and adding new combat algorithms, I was able to successfully finish the joust. And after that, I deposited Katina in a safe location, and I found a new body and left her combat armor in an easy place for her to find it. What else would you like to know?
I mean, interesting. So is Katina someone you still have contact with, or is this someone you have broken from entirely?
I have been trying to figure out who and what I am. I am not presently in contact with Katina, although I have no reason not to be. I did win the fight for her, after all.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be difficult to discover who you are when you are surrounded by people who knew what you were before. They have preconceptions, their own ideas of who or what you should be.
Cool. And mechanically, the thing for the Hollow Goddess is that they have this extra thing called the Hologlamour. There's some discussion in the book that this is open to kind of editing or invention outside of the options presented. But you went with Idoru, and I'm curious of how that presents when you like it, how this presents in your appearance.
The body that I found for myself was somewhat noteworthy and very distinctive. And it can be difficult not to notice a sentient mobile platform that is the home of an AI. Katina wasn't exactly quiet about what had happened, although she was not angry. So I became known as the robot who won the joust. As a result, I have fans everywhere, people encouraging me to re-enter jousts and competition. But that was part of who I was, and I'm not sure if it's part of who I want to be.
Interesting. So I guess I'm also curious, like how common are AI of your make within the world of jousting?
Before or after the electrical shock?
I mean, I guess answer either of those. That was what my curious. So I guess you're saying is that, but after there aren't any like you, but before that might be a different question.
Yes,
Okay.
combat AIs are relatively common. It is usually a software that is deployed on the knight's armor to, for example, track energy usage, to provide a heads-up display and to monitor, for example, damage to the chassis, and to let the knight know in real time what the metrics are. After the shock, I find myself alone. There are a number of people who have tried to duplicate the circumstances under which I was created, and all they have to show for it is some scorch marks on both their armor and themselves. Electricity usually disrupts human functioning in some way, and no one has as yet been able to duplicate these circumstances that led to my existence.
Interesting. I'm just kind of thinking of how to phrase this. What are you like? What is like the activity that you've been using to like at least try to, like right now, to try to kind of answer this sort of existential question of what is the purpose of your existence?
I study humans.
Okay.
I am not organic, but I have free will, which humans also have. So I study humans to see how they deploy free will, how they apply it, in the hopes that it might help me learn more about myself. It's impractical for me to learn from machines. Machines do what they are programmed to do. Humans, despite the idea that perhaps there are programmed functions of biology that drive humans, such as reproduction, humans often defy these biological imperatives and make other choices. That is something that machines and AIs up to this point have been incapable of doing. I have been a machine and an AI, and now I am something more. And therefore I must look to people to try to determine what that more is.
Cool. And that is Sola. And finally, we have Kira.
Hey, yeah, I'm Kira. I'm an escaped princess.
Okay.
And I think I'm going to leave the circumstances of how I escaped from my fate of being kind of fought over in a joust.
One question: Are you the younger
yes.
sister of Soto's friend?
Yes. Yes, go on then. Absolutely. And yeah, but I'm more commonly my name's Kira, but I more commonly just go by K, just the letter. And I have an innocent demeanor, kind of rough, oil-stained, hard-wearing clothes with lots of kind of patches on them, and I have a harmless sword. And it looks like a very dangerous laser sword. It looks really flashy and really, really expensive. But what I keep hidden is that it doesn't actually do anything apart from look flashy and expensive. But everyone looks at the sword, so it lets me do other things in the places that they're not looking. So if I need to get out of a conflict or need to if I need to fight, like it's a tool for misdirection, and it also misdirects from the fact that I don't actually like fighting. I don't really want to have a sword, so I have a fake sword. And yeah, so I think kind of ever since I was a kid, I've always kind of felt at home with kind of technology, with the kind of sort of minor AIs that kind of run various functions, particularly in a noble or royal kind of household that have lots of automation. And I think that I felt very isolated as a child, so I kind of developed kind of relationships with technology instead of with other humans, because like I didn't really relate to any of the concerns of any of the humans that I was around. And you can see in my character picture, one of the things I do is I create little kind of automaton bodies for these minor AIs. I create kind of physicality to have programs and technology that wouldn't normally have physicality, and I kind of like offer that to them as almost like a gift. It's kind of like it kind of grew out of kind of like imaginary friends, but it's a more kind of serious serious thing now, and yeah, and as you could probably imagine, I'm kind of fascinated by solar. Like that's kind of that's yeah, solar is extremely intriguing.
Yeah, and I should note, in case you at any point to any of the player characters, you actually can make the smitten move during character creation, and that that is and you can just answer that question while we're creating characters.
Lyra, if you want to do that right now, I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah. That sounds great. So let me find that move.
It is Love Conquers All under Truths of Heart and Blade.
Okay.
And even just to check on something really quickly.
Yes.
Under XP, if I remember correctly, using safety tools or a check-in or something along those lines means that we get XP for the session if anyone does it. Does that count?
Which part?
The check-in that I just did with Lyra.
Yeah, that would count.
Okay.
We'll get there. It's if you look at the end of session over in the moves list, it's listed there as part of everything.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I think that the clear challenge to being with Solar is that kind of say if this doesn't make sense, fuck it. But it's just that like Solar doesn't really know who they are yet, like let alone kind of like who they would want to be with, if anyone. Like it's kind of that they're still very much discovering themselves, and so it's kind of like yeah, and I kind of I'm overlooking it in one sense, in that like they're kind of bound to like that's bound to resolve itself kind of sooner than perhaps it would. Kind of, I'm thinking it's simpler that it would, but I'm also kind of like very aware of the need to give Solar space. So like I'm smitten, but kind of perhaps badly trying to hide it, but not doing very well at hiding it.
So, if I can suggest. I think Sola is just oblivious to it. Like, so you could do almost anything including walk up to Sola and kiss them, and its response would largely be, "That's an interesting physical sensation. Is this common among humans?"
I mean, if they're just friend kisses, clearly.
Oh.
So, it's like from your perspective, maybe you're badly flirting with Sola. From Sola's perspective, Sola doesn't know what's going on.
Oh, this is so juicy. I love it.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really like that.
I mean, Sola might literally have been born yesterday.
Cool. And this actually brings us here into, if you go over to relationships, I feel like we're hitting on that at this point. Yeah, if you wanted to Kay, open for us, throwing out one of your relationship questions, and I think we'll snake around here. Each character has 3 relationship questions. This is not like, say, Apocalypse World, where each character can only answer one. But you are free to say, you know what, I don't think a player character makes sense for this last relationship question. We can throw that out to an NPC, maybe. Yeah, are one of those Nature Witch questions in the relationships tab seem juicy to you that you want to throw out first?
Yeah, I was thinking, who thought they took you on a date when you thought it was just a fun, friendly time? And I have someone in mind for that, but kind of I think that makes sense for Trace Soto, if that works for you.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, I know you're meant to throw them out there, but that clearly kind of doesn't make sense given what we've just spoken about with Solar. So like, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
I mean, what was the date what was this date and how, because I'm curious, how oblivious was Kay in terms of this being a date?
I'm wondering if maybe it was. I think it's probably like something that was like what's the word I'm looking for? On the tip of my tongue. Ambiguous, right? So I don't think it was like, a romantic candlelit dinner with, violins playing and whatever. I think it was maybe something like maybe like going to a kind of a theme park or something like that, a sort of like something a bit more active, as it were.
Maybe kind of I'm still kind of like, I've still got some hang-ups from kind of noble society, kind of like royal society, kind of high noble, and kind of something's only a date in that sort of society if it fills some very specific traditions, and it's kind of like, oh, this can't be a date because like you haven't done this, that.
There was no handwritten invitation beforehand.
Yeah, there was no kind of like particular flower that signifies kind of what sort of what serious date it was, kind of like there's no it's kind of so it's kind of like, well, it's not a date because it doesn't like fulfill the criteria that you need for it to be a date.
Yeah, cool. I like that.
Cool. And coming back around, Sola, is there a relationship you wanted to throw out here?
I think, given what we've talked about, I have two that are just like absolute no-brainers. So I have an idea about this, but who has seen me at my most unhuman? And I feel like that's Kay.
Yeah, that works for me, definitely. Do you have an idea of kind of when that is? Or
I think I saw you with your automatons and realized that you were someone who was intimately connected to technology, and that I did not have to mimic human emotions around you. And so I was able to be robotic and connect with the automatons and transfer information to them in binary. So you have seen me at my most machine-like.
Yeah, that makes
machines.
sense.
And they're your machines, so you can. I don't know exactly how you do what you do, and out of character, I don't know how exactly you're doing what you're doing. In character, I don't think Sola cares how you're doing what you're doing. She just recognizes that you're doing something, and as such, they think that they're okay with you being themselves, their more authentic self, the one that doesn't try to mimic human emotions or human feelings or human sentiments.
Yep. And I kind of think that's one of the things that caused me to become smitten with you.
Okay.
I think that like I Kay doesn't necessarily, not in the same way, but kind of like Kay doesn't necessarily kind of like understand or kind of like interact well with most people's human emotions anyway. So it's that kind of like, it was kind of a bonding moment.
Great. Neither of us know how to person. There's no way this could end badly. There's no way this could be complicated.
Cool. And yeah, Wolf, do you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to go with the first one first, which is, who knows something about you that you've never spoken to? Oh, phrase again. Who knows something about you that you've never spoken about to anyone else?
I mean, if you're looking for volunteers, I could have found something about you in a database somewhere.
Yeah, that could work.
Or I could have downloaded metrics from your combat armor. Maybe tapped into. I'm assuming we're going to have a ship that we're going to be on, so maybe tapped into the ship's systems and inadvertently seen something on a camera that I didn't understand was maybe a secret. So.
I'm going to ask a quick question of Sol, if that's okay. Did you always have a concept of privacy? Was that something that you knew about?
I don't understand the question.
I mean, are they one of the few people that actually know about that you are from a noble family, or is that something that Wolf is just openly known about Wolf?
Yeah, that might make sense, because yeah, no, I think that could make sense. Yeah, I think maybe they've seen kind of my original, or they've been able to like cross-reference my biometrics or whatever with like the identity I no longer use.
Are you in a missing persons database?
Probably not like a missing persons thing, but like there's probably, where if you can like look at the right place, there's probably that sort of thing where like there are no longer any traces of person X existing and about the same time that person Y does, and it's like something like that. Maybe I think that would be cool.
Okay. So I have an inkling that you are from a noble family, or no,
Yeah.
outright you're from a noble family, but don't know why this is important.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, and since we'll just snake around here. So do you want to throw out a second one, Soto?
Yeah, sure. Who knows me better as a protector than they do as a person?
I think that makes sense to be Kay. It's, I think that I think Kay's kind of intimidated that by the fact that you're a knight, and kind of like has difficulty seeing beyond that to kind of the person you are underneath that. It's I think that gets in the way of it for Kay.
Cool.
Cool. And then Sola, do you have a second question you want to throw out?
Oh God, this is so obvious. Who most reminds me of someone I left behind? And I think it has to be Wolf, who reminds me of Katina. I mean, they're both knights. I probably at times interface with Wolf's combat armor just to make sure the combat protocols are up to date. So that just seems like a no-brainer to me. If you're okay with that.
Yeah. No, that sounds cool. That sounds cool.
Was Katina as jaded to the whole thing as Wolf was?
No, Katina was a true believer.
Okay.
She went into every fight. She would do silly things like mimic. She read these stories of old Earth Knights, so she would do silly things like tie a scarf around her armor. She would always talk about Arthurian myth and the Green Knight, and she talked about something called the Black Knight, but I could never find a reference to it. She said something about it continuing to keep fighting no matter the cost, but I could not find any legends or stories or evidence of such a person existing.
Cool. And Kay, did you have another question you wanted to throw out here?
Sure, I'm going to throw out who sees my potential.
I think that could also be Trace, unless you wanted to jump on that one, Puckett.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah, because I think definitely. I think Trace appreciates Kay's talents, and the aptitude that she has with machinery and the like, and probably thinks that she could probably be doing something better than just knocking around the jousting circuit, as it were.
Cool.
Is this something where you can have two people on the same question, or no?
I think, as many people are allowed to answer a question if you think they both apply.
Lyra, what do you think about Sola seeing your potential, not as a human, but someone who could become more machine-like?
Ooh.
Because of your interaction with the automatons. So, maybe Wolf sees your human potential and I see your machine potential.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Might pull you in two different directions. I know, obviously you can't be a machine. Beg pardon?
The soul of the Cyberman.
I thought you said Sola Asylum, and I was just like, oh, great. Are you? Yeah, the band. Sorry. Couldn't help it. Bad jokes.
Yeah, and did you want to throw out the last question you have to the other player characters, or did you want to introduce an NPC that might be true of?
I'm wondering if that is if that's my older sister.
Cool.
But I don't know that I know it, because I'm not sure that I ever saw beyond the. I'm not sure that I really properly saw beyond the facade of being the oldest, the kind of the senior princess in the family, kind of all the pressures that put on her. I don't actually have a name picked out, but yeah, I think that she. I think that if you asked her, which I don't think I ever have, but if you asked her, she would be really glad that I escaped, because I would be really unhappy in that life.
Cool. Yeah, we'll figure that name in a little bit. Yeah, and Sola, did you have a player character you wanted to hand out that question to, or do you have a NPC you wanted to bring in?
So here's a question for you. Can we tweak that question?
Sure. What did you have in mind?
Well, considering that Sola is a machine intelligence on a robotic platform, I don't know that Sola would understand being abandoned.
Mhm.
What if, and I'm not entirely sure how to frame this, but what if there was some sort of code base that Sola had been separated from and was no longer able to access? It might be an AI, it might be just a set of protocols, it could be a data store, but for whatever reason, Sola is unable to access it. I don't know how that would work necessarily as an NPC unless we add an NPC who has access to it and stands between Sola and that handwave thing.
Yeah. I mean, the thing itself might even be its own NPC if it's able to run on its own, like it's a part of you that's able to function independently.
I don't know that it's a part of me though.
Oh, okay.
It
Well,
might
it used to
be.
be a part of you.
It was something that I had access to.
Hmm.
And that was back before I became sentient. And for whatever reason, becoming sentient cut off my access to it. So maybe seeking another path to it. Any ideas?
Yeah, I have. I'm wondering who designed the combat AI system that you were born from and
Ooh.
what they feel about you and whether you like. I don't know if they see you as a threat or like. I'm imagining that there's some kind of like upgrade database that or kind of like pool of abilities and algorithms and resources that the manufacturer or the inventor of this AI system has, but they won't let you access it now.
Okay. I like that. I really like that. I think it's actually more than that. Like, I can't access it myself because it's surrounded by, for lack of a better term, black ice, like security software that would effectively shut me down and decommission me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to find another way to access it. But in the process, the person who wrote that software is probably the only thing that's keeping me safe is how public I am, that I'm so known. I mean, if I wasn't known, they'd probably just grab me off the street and, you know, take me apart and try to figure out what they could from whatever the pieces left over were to see if, how they could duplicate it or also give sentience to other combat AIs. So who do we think that person is? Does anybody have an NPC in mind who's already a scumbag or?
I mean,
if we really just want to tie everyone together, Kay must have learned robotics from someone in her family.
Yeah, I think it might be too direct if it's like one of my parents, but maybe an aunt or an uncle. Like there's kind of like, yeah, my royal house is kind of like is the producer of this combat AI software, perhaps.
I gotta ask, once you started making your own automatons and like putting AIs in them, were they a lot more interested in what you were doing?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's the person.
Yeah, but they always gave me the creeps, so I didn't. I kind of like played down what I could do because like I wanted nothing. I wanted nothing to do with the way that they approached that field.
Is this really just a mashup of Avatar and Dune?
Not having seen Avatar, I couldn't say, but there's definite Dune elements in there.
Yeah, this is starting to feel like the houses and the conflicts and
Yes.
like the backstabbing within them. Yeah, I like that idea. So, yeah, your uncle is apparently a nemesis of mine.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'm just looking at random name generator. I mean, I feel like a name that's slightly like, I feel like Rudolph might work just as a,
Ooh.
like, it's a pretty unassuming name, but it's also, I think, would work for an like Lord Rudolph.
Okay, one quick thing though, there is that bar called Rudy's in the CosmoKnights game or comic.
Oh,
Do we
okay.
care about that?
I can come up with a different name as well, if you think that would trip you up particularly.
I mean, not especially, but I just wanted to mention it, just in case. So, like, like if somebody called him Rudy or something like that. But is it Rudolph with an F or a PH?
I was going to go with a PH, but I could go with an F.
Okay. I just wanted to know so I could put it down on the character sheet and spell it the same way.
Yeah, I'm adding them just as a named NPC.
I imagine that if he's had any interaction with that bar at all, it's to try and get the place shut down for infringing on his name.
Cool, awesome. And I think that brings us to you having the last question, Soto.
Yeah, sure thing. One thing I was going to say, I did already have in the answer to one of the questions. I did put the name that I had in mind for the princess, if that's cool with you. Okay,
Sure.
I went for Araminta.
Okay, I'll grab the spelling of that from your. Perfect.
Yeah, it's just in the scars section down at the bottom.
Yeah, fantastic. Got it.
And my final question is, who are you scared to be vulnerable with? And I think that this is probably Solar. And perhaps scared is the wrong word, but I think obviously the fact that Solar is a combat suit and
rightfully hesitant.
Uses one, yeah. Exactly. It's that sort of still doesn't quite know how to interact with them, and I think that is that sort of hesitancy and just uncertainty that means that there possibly, I think, probably is an element of fear in there as well. But I think it's more so that than a direct fear of vulnerability itself.
Well, I'm sure Sola doesn't make it any easier because Sola probably asks questions that they don't know are inappropriate. For example, walking around the ship and happening to see you in the shower and asking what the dangly bits are.
Exactly.
So just, I think that makes absolute sense just because Sola doesn't understand things like, embarrassment, nudity, whatever.
We already have kind of basing this off of a work of fiction, so I think we already have a little bit of an idea of the genre of tone, that this is kind of a intergalactic sci-fi setting, with some hazy levels of what technology looks like in the world. um but I'm wondering, kind of coming in, of we all have the shared experience of reading CosmoKnights, and I'm curious of kind of going to the palette. This is something similar to the palette coming from say Microscope, in which we, like, for fantasy, we might not necessarily need to say that we want to see magic in the world because it is fantasy, for example, or that in science fiction we need to see like some kind of unusual unusual technology. But they are things that within the given fiction that we might want to see that we wouldn't otherwise expect, or that we definitely don't want to see in the fiction that we otherwise would expect. Like, I am a little bit curious, for example, because the character of Sola introduces it, and we didn't really see much of it in CosmoKnights. I am curious to see if there is some kind of AI, like, communities, maybe. Like, I'm curious if there are actual communities of AI within this world that I might want to see, that wouldn't otherwise necessarily expect to exist in the world. And then kind of I want to go around clockwise, and we'll keep adding until someone decides to pass, and then we'll finish out the round. But Sola, was there anything you wanted to see or that you didn't want to see in the fiction? And these, I should note, are things different from lines or veils. These are not things that like we are doing for safety necessarily. These are more like, I'm not really interested in this, or I'm very interested in this. This is a way of expressing interest, more more interest. Sorry.
So do you want us to fill in details about things or just broad strokes here?
Yeah, broad strokes are fine. If like there is something someone else adds, but you want to qualify it, that's also fine.
Yeah. Like, so with AI communities, I would think that they wouldn't be visible. If they occur, it's largely in digital spaces. I mean, more directly into the point, it would be exclusively in digital spaces because they exist for the most part either in databases or in combat suits. So something that I would like to see. I am blanking on ideas for the moment. If anybody has one and would like to jump in.
Yeah. Kay, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is something I was going to suggest that we maybe didn't want to see. Though I'm open to it if someone really wanted it, is direct interaction with the kind of major characters from CosmoKnights itself, because
Yeah, that
I
was
feel that could like really kind of restrict the fiction that we kind of like just even though you can change things kind of just in our heads, it kind of like has a kind of restricting effect. So kind of like I'd be comfortable with them being kind of like hearing about them on the news or like whatever, but kind of like I wouldn't be so keen on direct interaction.
Cool. Yeah, I was planning on that we would be playing in kind of a different corner of like the CosmoKnights galaxy anyway. But David, did you have something to?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in I'm just trying to think of a good way of phrasing it. I guess I'm quite interested in maybe seeing some of the like the court politics of the world, because I feel like, again, we sort of touched this a bit last week when we were talking about it, but we don't really learn in the comics so far a whole lot about how like the worlds like fit together and what that like. What the kind of relationships and stuff are like between planets. So I think that could be maybe something interesting to touch on.
Yeah, and I think also kind of coming off that another thing I am kind of interested in seeing like actually kind of come in, because they're really only invoked at the very end of the first volume, is also kind of fleshing out what the resistance looks like a little bit in the fiction. And Puckett, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah. Kind of building on what David said. So learning more about how the planets work is probably going to, or like how the planets interact with each other, will probably reveal this a little bit more. But I'm wondering about what kind of espionage goes on. Like, do neighboring planets try to figure out which princess is going to be, offered up as a reward for a joust? Do they try to sabotage the jousts? That sort of thing. Do they try to steal information to make their planet seem more favorable for jousting and, more desirable? Are all of the princesses ranked relatively equivalently the same? What do the titles do? Do titles to have the same merit based on the family? So
cool.
I just realized that's a hell of a lot. Sorry, started rambling.
No, that's okay. That's really interesting. And no, I made a note of that. Yeah, and actually espionage, intelligence. Yeah. And Kay, did you have anything you wanted to add either to the want to see or don't want to see?
Yeah, in the want to see, I'd like to kind of explore some stuff around the lives of kind of ordinary people that don't have a kind of direct connection with royalty or with the joust, or that's something that wasn't. It was background in CosmoKnights, but it wasn't ever really centered, and I'd like to explore that a bit more.
Cool. Yeah, I'll change that maybe to not directly connected, because I feel like if the leadership of these planets are doing it, that everybody's a little connected to the joust, even if like affected by it, even if they're not connected to it. Yeah. And David, did you have something you wanted to add? Or you can also pass and remember that that's also an option.
Yeah, I think that's probably covered. Again, the sort of the ordinary people. I think that's kind of quite interesting. It's something I was quite interested in sort of thinking about as well. But yeah, no, I can't think of anything specific at the minute else to add.
Okay. Oh, cool. And I'll throw it out once more to you, Puckett, because you've really only had one opportunity to add things so far. Is there something you wanted to add, or are you also kind of coming up blank right now?
I want to know more about what happens to jousters when they become unable to joust, either through injury/disability, age, loss of skills, etc.
Cool.
I mean, it sounds like they are basically hot shit for a half second, but then what?
Right.
Like, are they like old NFL players? Are they just like kind of broken down, hurting all the time? What happens? How do they interact? Or do they have the same social standing that they did as jousters, etc.?
Cool.
Yeah, actually, that does remind me of something I was thinking of as well, which is kind of like very much tied into it. But yeah, also looking at the kind of jousting community, like as a thing. So I guess in like the again in the comics, it very much felt like even with Bull, it felt like they were kind of an outsider to the community itself. And yes, I guess just seeing how like jousting parties interact with one another as as their community is like. But yeah.
And adding on that, what kind of support is there? I mean, like in the comic, we see, the jousters basically kind of fixing things themselves, but it also seems like they're kind of barely scraping by. What happens with a more funded jouster? I mean, is it like NASCAR where they have a support team to repair everything for them and get good parts and get them back in action really quickly? Are there freelance support garages? What's the stuff on the periphery of it? Like tuning shops for street racers and whatnot. And are all these things above board? Are any of them black market?
Yeah. And I think this it gives a good jumping point into kind of the second part of this world building questions, is like, what kind of community are the characters all a part of? And so this is something that it's kind of, I feel like the community is kind of, like the lens and scope for the story we want to go with. Because you can go as wide as, if you look at the examples, a galactic union, but you can also like zoom in to something as, like, I'm looking at some of the smaller ones here, an insular commune or a well-regarded social group or a secret coven. So I was curious, like, what was the community what did we want to define as our community? Is it the actual community of jousters, or is it a different community that we want to define our characters as belonging to?
I wonder if it's perhaps not the resistance itself, but like something connected with the resistance. Because I'm thinking if the community is like, it seems like the standard expectation of the community is that it kind of like acts generally in opposition to the toxic powers. And I don't feel like the community of jousters would necessarily do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, yeah, so something peripheral to the resistance, but I don't know quite what that would look like.
Yeah, I feel like the community doesn't necessarily have to have a directly oppositional relationship, but it should be imperiled to some degree by the toxic powers. Because, of course, one of the choices of the toxic powers can be, like, if you go over there, but they can threaten the community from within. But yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Puckett?
I was just wondering how the resistance would react to, well, me. Would I find more acceptance within the resistance than I would in the broader world? Would they be more tolerant of me? Because that would shape how the way the community treats me would shape how I interact with it. And it is, I am an unusual life form.
Mm-hmm.
I am actually a wholly unique life form. So if the resistance is more tolerant of that, sure, that being more adjacent to that would be fine. In terms of I also like the idea of being connected to the community of jousters. And it may be the case that, I asked earlier, what happens to jousters when they can't joust anymore? I wonder how many jousters become members of the resistance if they get tossed aside and ignored.
So here's a thought. What if, taking inspiration from the book, there is a bar that is for jousters, that is a resistance front?
Like you have to know the passcode to get into the resistance part of it type thing?
Yeah.
I like that
did
idea.
you have any thoughts though, David? I wanted to make sure we got your input here.
Yeah, no, that sounds cool. Actually, I really like that idea. That kind of setting it around like a specific place with that sort of like sort of subcultural thing going on. I think that sounds cool.
Cool. So we'll define the scale of the community as maybe this like both kind of widely and narrowly as like the support group of jousters centered on a resistance front. Does that work for folks as kind of just a quick write up here?
Sure.
Cool. And what is especially positive about this community?
I think that and because I think this probably applies to both of them, I think they're resilient. Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Because I mean, I don't need to go with only one strength. This is a way of kind of throwing ideas out here.
Yeah, I feel like maybe some of that resilience comes from the diverse experiences of the members of the people who are part of the community.
Cool.
I just wanted to add, and I think this actually gets what Lyra was talking about, tolerance. There were a lot of different types of jousters, and this is a place where they can meet and get along, then they kind of need to be tolerant of other experiences and whatnot.
Cool. Yeah, that works for me. So I have, and what NPC epitomizes this virtue?
I kind of want there to be kind of like a wise barkeeper sort of figure. Like the immediate touchstone that comes to mind is Guinan from Next Generation, but kind of like someone who'll just kind of listen to anyone's troubles and kind of offer words of advice and comfort.
Cool.
Do you think they're next jouster or just a bartender?
I don't know. Like, I kind of like the idea of them being an ex-jouster.
Yeah, I'm looking at the fantasy name generator for bandits, and I feel like this has produced some very good retired jouster names. Zach Razor, or let's see.
Oh, come on. We got to go with Zach Razor. The bar's called the Razor's Edge.
Yes, okay.
One thing I would like, if this is okay with everybody, I'd like to specify that Zach was retired from jousting due to some particularly grievous injuries, which left him with like a cybernetic leg and a cybernetic arm. But they're really cheap, bad cybernetics. So they're always making noises and going on the fritz. But, he like, it's not uncommon for him to just like, people are just used to it. It's like he grabs something with a cybernetic arm, plunks it down, and you hear the clicking and whirring of the machinery in the arm.
I keep trying to convince him to let me take a look at it, but like he absolutely won't.
He's too proud.
Yeah.
He doesn't need help.
And what do we think is the serious flaw of this community?
I mean, kind of building on that, like pride. This idea that people can stand on their own without needing help. Even though, you know, the knights who went out there and jousted could not have done so. There's an old Saint Etienne album. You need a mess of help to stand alone. You know, and I feel like the jousters feel like they stood alone while everybody else around them knows how much bullshit that is.
Oh God, is the NPC that epitomizes this flaw Katina?
Why not?
I also feel that the same sort of thing speaks to kind of how the joust kind of I feel like particularly the kind of the type of jouster that would hang out in this bar kind of like sometimes has trouble acknowledging like how they're contributing to kind of toxic systems and kind of like oppressive systems, and like perhaps not necessarily by their own choice, but like they're taking part in the joust, and which is and like they don't like they kind of see themselves as apart from that, whereas like it's not actually so clear how separable that is.
So it's not just their participation in toxic systems, it's that their attitudes about it are toxic as well?
Or at least that they can be.
Okay.
Like that's part of the spectrum.
I mean, I absolutely love what you're talking about. That's great.
And I want to ask, actually, maybe throw out to David, is there anything you want to expand on this serious flaw part?
No, that pretty much ties into what I was already thinking. I was sort of thinking, kind of like that sort of, hot-headedness and stuff, which I think kind of, we've already sort of touched on in that sort of like, can get people, a lot of people who think that they know best and are used to kind of doing their thing.
Yeah, and I had forgotten to ask, what does Zach Razor want from the PCs?
He did answer the just survive. He wants them to pay their bar tab, damn it.
I mean, that's probably part of it. I mean, at least for you humans.
I mean, I think that Zach would probably remind Sola that they did order those 3 drones for you that you still haven't paid for.
I wonder. I like that. I wonder if it's something. I wonder if Zach wants me to get into some data store on his behalf. He's got a question, but he won't quite tell me what it is. He just wants me to get some information for him quietly without anybody noticing.
Okay, so we might say that like is Zach wants payment, but maybe also Zach wants the player characters to carry out shady or secretive work on his or the Resistance's behalf.
Definitely on the Resistance's behalf. If it's on his behalf, I wonder if he's in business for himself as well. Not quite playing both sides, but trying to get a little something extra for himself.
Does that work
whether it's nefarious or otherwise? Yeah.
Does that work for Kay and Soto?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what does Katina want from the PCs? I mean, I think that there are a lot of things to answer about what she wants from Sola specifically, but I guess more generally from the other PCs, what does she want?
I mean, David, you're playing a jouster. What would she want what would a jouster want from you?
Yeah, I wonder if maybe I wonder if it.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no. Yeah, I wonder if it is just something as simple as just like respect that even though she's obviously she is kind of a champion. I wonder if maybe she's still not seen as like entirely deserving of her position, perhaps, but or something like that. But
yeah, that works. I mean, because if we do want it depends, we've left it a little bit open here, but within the fiction, there are not really a whole lot of fighters that openly compete as women in the jousts, and I'm curious if that is part of it.
Maybe for me specifically, does she want to poach me for like her kind of maintenance crew?
Yes. I'm actually just gonna say for maintenance crew, in quotation marks, because I feel like it will inevitably become for other things. But yeah, what is at least one location associated with your community? I think we've already kind of defined and obvious the Razor's Edge, but why would it be a dramatic place to have a sword fight there?
I have an idea for this one, if people are okay with that. I'm imagining there's some scenes from Star Wars that come to mind. I'm imagining kind of maybe the Razor's Edge is kind of like jutting out kind of next to a kind of spaceship arrivals lane. So you've got all these kind of this traffic going past it. It's got these kind of downward facing windows onto the spaceport, and kind of like, so it's kind of like it's kind of simultaneously underground in that it's at the bottom of buildings, but also kind of suspended in midair. This kind of odd sci-fi way. So like I'm imagining kind of lots of possibility for kind of like jumping between kind of towers and kind of hanging off the bottom of things, sword fighting. And
I would just like to add that there is a second floor inside the bar that's a balcony, and there has to be some kind of chandelier there.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just like overhead hanging lights or something like that, that of course are big enough for a person to grab and swing from, or maybe even stand on.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those games. I'm thinking of a Miyazaki kind of like game where they straight up had the question of, does our setting have windmills as one of the questions? And I feel like that every location there should just be like the question, does it have a chandelier? Yes or no?
Does it have something you can swing
Yes.
from while you're sword fighting?
Yes.
I mean, it's a redundant question because the answer's always yes.
Yes.
Well, it needs to be.
Yeah. But yeah, moving into the toxic powers, this is again kind of a way of like the scope of our toxic powers is kind of about the scope for the game. Like coming from the fiction, probably we're going to end up saying that the toxic powers is going to involve the aristocracy somehow. But the question is, do we want to make our toxic power the aristocracy in general, or do we want to single out like some particular house that is going to be like the center of our fiction?
And the obvious one is the house that Kay came from. Kay and Araminta.
Yeah.
And Lord Rudolph.
Yeah, they already have a fair number of connections to the PCs. I feel like that goes without saying that we should make them. Does anyone have a name they want? Like, I guess it's going to be your character's a family name, I assume. So I figure you might want to give them the name here. Okay.
Looking up Noble House Name Generator. There we go. Ooh. Maybe come back to me once I look through the name generator a little bit.
So the question is then, do they threaten your community from within or from outside? And this is a little bit of a tough question because I feel like, do they have patrons with it? I mean, do they patronize? Do they have like fighters they they give patronage to within the community? Or are they outsiders to it?
I feel like from the context of what we're looking at, I feel like they're probably more of an external threat.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can see them potentially exercising power in a more internal way, but I think that fundamentally it is more of an outside thing, I think.
Yeah. Cool. And the question is, what do they want? And there's some examples here. This doesn't have to be a complicated answer, but they're like, we can leave it like short or simple, like just like with respect. Domination, order, safety, strife, conformity, like silence, possessions, to humiliate, to tear down your achievements. I'll throw this over to you, Sola. Do you have any thoughts first off?
Well, this is Lyra's house, correct?
Yeah.
The house she came from. I don't know that all of the house is this way, but I think certainly Lyra's uncle or Kay's uncle is domineering and power seeking.
I'm wondering if this house kind of more than many other houses kind of like holds kind of corporate and technological power within it. It kind of like merges the nobility and kind of corporateness in a way that perhaps it is somewhat new or not that usual. Like maybe there's a little bit of a kind of like, it's not considered decorous to be kind of involving yourself in commerce, but
probably saying like they want domination, maybe.
Yeah, domination and conformity. I think. Does that seem right?
Yeah. And how do we feel about the name House Stone?
I'm fine with that.
Let me just have that there. And why? I think we kind of gotten into this, but beside like so are folks cool with it being sort of like technological advantage and kind of social power are their kind of main tools?
Yep.
Cool. And I'll throw this out here to the outsiders, to the house. What's so appealing about them? Why would someone be tempted to work for them? Or work with them, or be seduced by members of the house?
feel like the most obvious answer is wealth and social status.
Yeah. I think that's sort of what I was going for. I wonder if also if they have a reputation for actually being quite honourable, in the sense that they aren't one of the, it's not the sort of Lannister type thing where they will always inevitably betray you. It's like they actually genuinely do tend to, if you make a deal with them, they hold up their end of the bargain, that sort of thing.
Do they hold up the letter of it or the intent of it, though? I mean, are we talking like belabored contractual negotiations to make sure you've covered every contingency? Otherwise, they'll lawyer you to death?
I feel like it's a more genuine thing. I feel like maybe like the actual, keeping your word is actually sort of something they do have a genuine level of respect for. And certainly some of them will almost certainly break it if needs be. But I think as a whole, I think that's maybe that's something where it is kind of a bit of a point of pride almost for them.
Cool. And again, what is a location associated with House Stone, and why would it be a dramatic place to have a sword fight?
I'm going to suggest a kind of something that's maybe like Castle Stonehold, and it's a kind of folly and a kind of affectation of an ancient earth kind of fortification that's so you've got this kind of like I'm thinking kind of French chateau type kind of like fantasy castle.
I like the idea that just building off that. I like the idea that it is just kind of built on like a giant like anti-grav platform floating over the city.
Oh yes. Yeah. And perhaps that it's not strictly kind of like constrained by the normal rules of gravity. Maybe it's like it's got the form of a French chateau, but it's spherical, and like kind of like the floors are in different orientations.
Yeah, I'm already typing down for why it would be an interesting place to have a fight, because Wixia sword fights. Cool. And do we want to go with Lord Rudolph as the face, or do we think that there is I think we've already kind of established that as the main face here. If that works for folks.
Works for me.
Cool.
I'm curious. It's Kay, is this one of those things where your father vanished under some circumstance or died suspiciously, and Uncle Rudolph now kind of runs things?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so. I think that probably happened after I got out. But I think that's because I kind of want to avoid the kind of like want to avoid going full kind of cliche kind of like wicked uncle / wicked stepmother sort of narrative.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that happened kind of maybe several years back.
Interesting.
I'm curious. So we've defined House Stone as the first toxic power, but what do we think is the other toxic power within the world that will kind of clash up against the player characters?
I have a suggestion, but I realize I've been talking a lot recently, so if anyone else has something, then go for it.
No, go for it. I have sort of very vague ideas, but nothing that's quite cohering into a specific thing. So go for it.
I'm wondering if this is a kind of rival community of knights with kind of very different values to ours. Like whether it's
like maybe we
Yeah.
might define. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of ties into what I was already thinking, which was we've obviously said that we've kind of got this like sub community where these are the sort of knights that hang around the Razor's Edge and all of this sort of thing. So yeah, I was wondering maybe just like the knightly community more broadly, and that because that feels very much in that sort of toxic power mold. And again, it's not necessarily an outright antagonistic. Well, I suppose it is antagonistic in the literary sense, but it's not a necessarily evil, but it is has a lot of problems and is going to come to blows with this sort of thing.
Yeah, and that plays in that the toxic powers are called toxic powers, I think, for a reason. They're not necessarily evil. They just have like destructive relationships with the world, like destructive or toxic relationships with the world. But so I think this is what we're saying is maybe threatens the community from within, maybe. And what do the knights want as and maybe we haven't really heard from you on this, Puckett. What do the knights want?
The competing knights?
Yeah.
What does anybody want? Wealth, social prestige. They're trying to get a rep for themselves, and then parlay it into something more. Endorsement deals, for example.
Cool.
Like if you are the knight with the most victories and you retire, you can probably, for example, become a spokesperson for a particular sword or weapons manufacturer and tell other knights, this is what I used when I was coming up. Go ahead, be like me.
Cool. Yeah. And so for why are they so dangerous, I think probably one answer is skill at arms, right? But is it also that their media presence is part of their power as a toxic power?
I think so, because they are reinforcing the hegemony every time they fight, every time they speak. They want this system to continue. They want to preserve it because they are benefiting from it.
Cool.
I would just go ahead and say a George Foreman grill in response to your question, Ira. Like, I think they probably still exist.
Yeah.
And the 70-second clone of George Foreman is still pitching them.
Yeah. I'm just thinking this has so many parallels to kind of like boxing and kind of sports in today.
Yeah, well, it was what I brought up that it is, I think, not a coincidence that she also writes the comics adaptation of Glow. That there's a lot of parallels there. But
I'm sorry, did you say that there's a comic adaptation of Glow?
Yeah, the author of CosmoKnights actually is the writer. I forget if she's the writer or the artist, but she works on that comic. I think it's with Boom. They do all the licensed comics properties.
I will have to look into that. That dovetails two of my interests quite nicely.
Cool. Yeah, I was feeling that it might. But yeah, and what's appealing about them? Is it the fame, or is it something else as well?
I'm wondering if it's the way that the way that you can kind of, if you're extremely lucky, kind of escape having like no real prospects in life. Like you can become a knight and work your way up. Like I wonder if there's an amateur circuit of kind of knights that kind of like then you can break, kind of if you're really lucky, you can break into the big leagues and kind of like get off your backwater planet and.
The squires. There's it's like maybe some retired knights have opened a training academy and have opened a semi-competitive circuit, almost like some of the kart racing that goes on, where they send people out with weapons that are non-lethal, that aren't gonna, they'll get banged up but not too much, and send them out to practice jousting and, almost like flag football or something like that. You're not supposed to get hurt doing this, but it gives people an idea of your potential.
I think we've just got our location.
Cool. And what was that like? A description of?
Okay.
Lyra.
The academy of it was a kind of a training academy for wannabe knights, and maybe something quite kind of. I'm imagining someplace quite like.
Like a boxing gym, almost.
Yeah.
And I imagine that there are probably a bunch of high-tech like training devices that will inevitably like get triggered and during the fight.
Of course. And I also think this is probably fairly well funded because they want it to seem impressive to people who are considering paying to train there.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't something that happens yes, it's a way out, and maybe there are some scholarships for lack of a better way to put it. But you also get, for example, rich nobles who come here and kind of goof off because they think they have what it takes. So there may be some kind of conflict. Maybe some of the people at this academy remember what it's like to be young and hungry and take kids in just to give them a chance. But the rest of the time it's funded by wealthy people who have more money than sense.
Yeah, and I think that because we're running late on time here, I think that how these two toxic powers relate to each other is fairly well highlighted. But I'm curious, who is the NPC that acts as the face of the second toxic power? Because I feel like we want to introduce a different PC than Katina. That Katina maybe is a more friendly rival, whereas this one is someone who represents a little bit more what's wrong with the knights.
Well, it has to be somebody who married into that system, doesn't it? Somebody who actually won a favor and maybe kept it.
Yeah, I quite like that. And I wonder if maybe, if they if it is someone who's like you said, married into the nobility, but and maybe it is even like that they're like one of the driving forces behind this academy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was thinking if it was going somewhere else, but yeah, no, I think, and maybe like, and maybe even like they're now using kind of the role of the academy to kind of try and politic themselves further, and seize more power essentially.
I wonder if they're a bit of a traditionalist who kind of wants kind of nobles to kind of like fight rather than sponsoring a knight for the kind of hand of a princess, whether they want them to kind of fight for themselves, which like on the surface seems quite like within the strictures of that kind of like a more honorable and more honest way to do it, but actually kind of like has the effect of removing this kind of avenue of social mobility and kind of restricting it more to the more to kind of within the nobility itself.
I really like that.
Cool. And does anybody have a particular name they want to throw out for this prince? Otherwise, I can come up with a name for them.
I don't have anything that springs
Okay,
to mind.
I'll give them a name. Oh, go ahead.
How about Lord Grigori?
Cool.
Grigori. What does everybody think about that?
It works for me. I maybe even like the idea that that's maybe even like, because we're talking about someone that married in, that maybe it's like Prince or something.
Absolutely. You know, whatever the title becomes for somebody who married
Yeah.
into the nobility. But this is definitely somebody who wants to pull the ladder of social mobility up after them.
Yeah. Cool. So I think that pretty much wraps us up for the evening. We're already running a bit long, and this has mostly just been character creation. I just wanted to say I had a lot of fun going through all this with you. I really like the setup we've already put together here. I think there's just so many things going on with these characters, and they're a little part of the world that that kind of feels like it builds off of a lot of the stuff in CosmoKnights in really interesting ways. And I really look forward to seeing how everything kind of I assume explodes from this point. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to playing with y'all next week. Yeah, I think that basically sums us up for the evening. To anyone who is watching this later on, thank you, and you should also go read CosmoKnights if you haven't. Also come play on the Gauntlet, that too. But I will be seeing y'all. Have a good night.